Hello, welcome to another edition of TutorTube, where Learning Center's lead tutors help you understand challenging course concepts with easy-to-understand videos. My name is Kelly Schmidt, lead tutor for statistics at Learning Center. In today's video, we will run through the process of conducting a one-way ANOVA in SPSS. Let's get started. First, let's define our research question. In this example, we're interested in examining the levels of social activism among college students. We hypothesize that a student's year in college, freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, will impact their level of social activism, but we don't know how. In order to test this, we gather the following data from a group of 40 students. Each student is either in year 1, 2, 3, or 4 in school, and their scores on a test of activism are recorded. We're interested in comparing the mean scores between these four groups. Looking at the scores themselves, we can see by inspection that it looks like year 3, the juniors, appear to have the lower scores than the other three groups. However, in order to get a better sense of the difference and how our sample represents the overall population, we'll need to use a one-way ANOVA. First, we need to input our data into SPSS. When we first open up SPSS, we'll see a blank data sheet that looks like this. Notice that we are in Data View. This is the place where we can enter our raw data. In the first column, let's enter the values for our years, either 1, 2, 3. Remember that in SPSS, each row represents a single person, so we can't enter the data as they appear in our table. We'll need to enter them in just two columns, one for the year and one for our activism score. Notice that as we enter our data for year, SPSS automatically names our column var 0001. We can clean this up later, so for now let's move on to entering the data for the activism scores. Okay, so now we've entered the raw data. We need to code it so that SPSS knows how to treat it. Click on Variable View in the bottom left to switch to the Variable View window. The first row here corresponds to our year column. We can rename this column year instead of var 0001. Next, we want to label the values themselves. Click on the box that appears in the values cell. This will open up a new window. And remember that instead of entering the names of the years themselves, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, we entered dummy-coded labels of 1, 2, 3, and 4 instead in the data view. Here we can tell SPSS what each of those dummy-coded numbers corresponds to. So for a value of 1, we have a label of freshman. Now we click on Add, and we can see that this label has been added to the system. Now every time SPSS sees a 1 in the year column, it will know to label it as freshman in the output. We repeat the process for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Now we just click on OK and move back to our variable view. The last thing we need to do for this column is to specify the measure for this variable. Since the years correspond to names, either freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, This is considered nominal data. Now we can switch back to data view and see how this has changed our data. Notice that the column name has now been changed to year, and that the three bubbles next to it are denoting that this variable is nominal instead of scale. Now we can switch back to variable view and repeat a similar process for the activism scores column. Here we can rename the column as activism and change the measure to scale. The scores here are our dependent variable, and in a one-way ANOVA, these will always be a numerical or scale measure. Now that we have our data coded, we can move on to the analysis step. There are two ways to conduct a one-way ANOVA in SPSS. They both provide the same results, but one goes a little bit more in depth, and you can get a few more values from the output. First, click on Analyze, then General Linear Model, and then Univariate. This will open up the window for a univariate analysis, which is what we need. First, we choose our dependent variable. For a one-way ANOVA, this will be your scale variable, the activism scores we wanted to compare. Click on activism and then the arrow to add it into the dependent variable box. Next, we select our independent variable, our groups. So click on year, and then click on the arrow to move it into the fixed factors box. Now we'll click on options and select the boxes next to the statistics we want to see. Descriptive statistics will give us a summary of the stats, the mean, the standard deviation, standard error, and size of each of the groups. Estimates of effect size will calculate the eta squared for the main effect. So in other words, this will give us a way to see if the differences between our groups were big enough to matter. Observed power is also good to include. Recall that power is essentially your ability as a researcher to detect an effect using the sample we have. So think of power as a magnifying glass that you're trying to use to find a difference between these groups. We also want to be sure to include homogeneity tests. This will help us to check our assumption of homogeneity of variance. You'll also hear this referenced to as Levine's test. So click on Continue, and this will move back to the original window. Lastly, we can also include post hoc tests by clicking on post hoc. Technically, we wouldn't run the post hoc tests until we verified that our variances are roughly equal and that a significant main effect exists, but for demonstration, I'll run them now. So click on the factor that we want to test, year, and then use the arrow to move it into the post hoc tests box. Once there, it'll allow you to select which types of post hoc test you'd like to run. For a one-way ANOVA, with roughly equal sample sizes in each group, we can go ahead and run Tukey. So now click on Continue, and we're good to go. We can click OK. And here, SPSS will give us our output file. We can see the title of the analysis we just ran, a univariate analysis of variance, or a one-way ANOVA here at the top. We can also see our descriptive statistics, our test for homogeneity of variances, which is met at a significance of 0.061, and the rest of our results as we scroll down. So with that, we have gone through the process of conducting a one-way ANOVA. Thank you for watching this TutorTube presentation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to our channel for more exciting videos. Check out the links in the description below for more information about the Learning Center, and follow us on social media. See you next time.